Generally speaking, there's a tendency to think of selections as an outline identifying the object you want to select. In many cases, rather than tracing along the edge of an object, it can be helpful to paint to define areas to be selected. In this lesson, we'll take a look at the Quick Mask mode, which enables you to paint rather than trace to define a selection. I really only use the Quick Mask mode for modifying an existing selection rather than creating a new selection from scratch. In this case, I've already created a selection, so I'll go ahead and go to the Select menu and choose Load Selection to bring up the Load Selection dialog. I'll choose Barn as the channel and click OK, which will give me my saved selection of the barn. This is a far from perfect selection, and we'll refine the selection using Quick Mask mode. First, we need to configure Quick Mask mode. The Quick Mask mode button is found at the very bottom of the toolbox. If you click on this button, it will take us into Quick Mask mode, and if you click again, we will go out of Quick Mask mode back to the normal selection mode. You can also switch back and forth between Quick Mask mode and normal mode by pressing the letter Q, as in Quick Mask, on your keyboard. However, if we want to modify the settings for our Quick Mask first, we'll want to double-click on the Quick Mask mode button. Doing so will bring up our Quick Mask options. And right away, you can get a better sense of exactly what this Quick Mask feature is all about. In essence, areas of the image that are selected will appear in their normal color. Areas of the image that are not selected will appear with a color overlay. The default is a red color overlay, but in some cases, that red might blend into other areas of the image. You do have the option, first off, to change which areas will be covered in color. Areas that are masked, in other words, not selected, or areas that are selected. Generally, I prefer the masked option so that areas of the image that are selected appear normal and other areas appear with a color mask. To change the actual color, we can click the color swatch to bring up our color picker dialog. In this case, I'll change the color to a vibrant shade of yellow, which I think will contrast a little bit better with some of the colors I'm going to be working with. After choosing that color, I'll click OK, and then I can adjust the opacity if I'd like as well. The default is a 50% opacity, where we can still see through the color to the underlying texture, but there's enough of a color to make it obvious. I generally work with 50% opacity, but you could certainly adjust this up or down if you prefer. When you're happy with the settings, simply click OK, and as you can see, the changes have been made to our Quick Mask mode. When using Quick Mask mode, we'll actually use the brush tool to paint in areas that we want to include or exclude from the selection. Of course, we may want to configure our brush tool first. In most cases, I'll work with a hard-edged brush with a hardness of 100% so that I can make a crisp-edged selection. In other words, a selection that has not yet been feathered. This is important because in most cases, my initial selection will also not have been feathered, and I want the initial selection, the selection that I've cleaned up, to be consistent in terms of that feathering. So I'll use a 100% hardness so that none of the selection is feathered. Then I can later feather the entire selection if needed. We'll want to make sure that the blend mode is set to normal and that the opacity is at 100% so we're getting the full effect of the brush as we're painting. We'll also want to press the letter D on your keyboard to make sure that the colors are set to their default values of black as the foreground and white as the background. We can switch between these two colors by pressing the letter X on the keyboard. Note, by the way, that you also have the option to click the small representation of the color picker to choose the default colors and the small double-headed curved arrow to switch the colors between foreground and background. At this point, I'm ready to paint, and so I'll zoom in on the image to start cleaning up my selection. The brush in this case is obviously far too large, so I'll press the left square bracket to reduce the size of the brush. I could also use the right square bracket as needed to increase the size of the brush. Now in Quick Mask mode, we add color by painting in black, in other words blocking areas from the selection, and we remove the color by painting in white, choosing areas that we want to include in the selection. So for example, if I paint on the roof here with black, you'll see that I get the yellow color overlay, which indicates this area is no longer included in the selection. If I press X to switch my foreground color to white, I can then paint over that area again, effectively erasing the color overlay, but really adding that area to the selection. So up here I have an area where we can see the top of the barn showing through, and there's a little bit of a yellow color overlay on that area. So I'll paint with white to remove the color from those areas, adding those portions of the image into the selection. I can then continue painting as needed, painting with white to add areas to the selection and black to remove areas from the selection. At any time, I can switch back and forth between normal mode and quick mask mode by simply pressing the letter Q on the keyboard. This gives us a little bit of a better sense of working with quick mask mode and the result that we're achieving. You might notice that working with quick mask mode in this way is very similar to working with the lasso tool to clean up a selection. The difference is, with the lasso tool, we're tracing along the edge of a selection, whereas with quick mask mode, we're painting over the image to define areas of that selection. The concepts are very similar, it's just a different approach in terms of the technique. From my perspective, using quick mask mode comes down to a decision between tracing or painting to define the edge of a selection. In other words, it mostly comes down to a matter of personal preference, based on your preferred method of working in a given situation. That said, in many cases you'll find quick mask mode is simply unbeatable as a tool for refining your selections.